the representative mainly from the French Union, the professional union from ecological engineering here in the BISON project. And it's true that I also have a foot in the research as a member in the, so I have no mandate for representative for them, but it's fine. Thank you very much. Just to be clear. In the think tank session about monitoring, we discussed two main things we've done in the BISON project. In the BISON project, we worked on monitoring the following different aspects. The first one is developed mainly in the handbook driven by Carme, where we are discussing how we currently do the monitoring. And monitoring in a large sense, because we are discussing at the same time how we can monitor the mitigation hierarchy implementation, for example, and how we can monitor the fact that when we are developing a project or when we are upgrading existing infrastructure, we have to implement the mitigation hierarchy with our 3 steps: avoiding, reducing, and compensating. And there are some tools for monitoring the avoidance, for monitoring the reduction, and for monitoring the compensation. Not only the measures, but the fact that some projects are applying the avoidance, some other the same, and others are also implementing the compensation. So this is one of the forms of the monitoring we have to implement developing transport infrastructure. We have discussed this morning in the session, providing some examples and discussing some points of how could be the future of this kind of monitoring. The second point we have concerning, I would say, the current practices and another type of monitoring is finally how to monitor the measures implemented. So how and what kind of monitoring system we can implement in order to have an idea of how efficient are the measures we are implementing for biodiversity. So how we can measure and say by the end, okay, this measure is working, this other one is not working. So this is another point we rapidly discussed this morning, and which will be largely developed in the handbook we will provide in the BISON project. So this is maybe the first part of what we discussed this morning, and which is about the current practices, and I would say more coming from the biodiversity part, people working on this topic. The other big part we discussed this morning, and for which I led a task in the BISON project, is about the digitalization of our work, at the same time in the infrastructure management and in the biodiversity management. Okay, so this part is bringing us, I would say, a step further in nowhere, because in addition to making people discussing from landscape planning, from the infrastructure sector, from the biodiversity one, we also have to discuss with people coming from the computer science and software developments. So at some point, it can be another step harder to put all these things together. And finally, okay, it can be hard to manage all these things at the same time, but it is also an opportunity for us to provide some solutions. In the previous presentation, we often say, okay, we have many different topics to address at the same time. It can be complicated. We have many data. We have troubles in sharing it between people. And maybe one of the tools able to help us in sharing information engaging people, communities around this type of project can be digital tools such as BIM or digital twins. And this is a point we discussed also this morning, having in mind that this is an opportunity to, at the same time, collect information, save some time and money with a better management of our infrastructure and how we manage the data we need to in the day-to-day management of the infrastructure. A way of improving the collaboration between the different contractors who are working on this different transport infrastructure. So it can be at some point an opportunity to save some time and money, being able to work more rapidly and in a more efficient way with facilities for sharing information, data, and so on. Okay. And maybe another point we developed this morning is that, okay, technology can help us in improving our way of managing biodiversity around infrastructures. But still, technology used to be energy consuming and resource consuming. So we should keep in mind that sometimes, yeah, technology can help us in managing this kind of things, but we should try to find a way to mix technological solution with existing more traditional ones in order to be sure that we won't develop high technological solutions which can finally be harmful for biodiversity and global changes in general. So that was, I would say that a point where we should keep this in mind in order to not be counterproductive in our trying to make infrastructure more sustainable. Another and probably last point I will develop, the last point we discussed was how these tools can also help in interacting with people. And we discussed two ways of involving people's all the stakeholders using this kind of technology. The first one is developing citizen science, where any people, for example, seeing species can directly report to digital twins or BIM models the fact that they have seen a species or a specific habitat and so on. So still a lot of work to make this kind of approaches functional, but it can be one of the solutions for the future. And another idea at the end of the project is that using this kind of digital models, we can show to communities how the landscape is expected to be in the future. And for example, when you presented the landscape earlier, okay, sure, people say, oh, you remove all the trees and oh, it can be horrible, that's true. But with an appropriate digital model, we can say, okay, but in 2 years, maybe we are expecting that the landscape will face like this. And in 10 years, it will be like this. And a step further, we can also try to estimate the more global dynamics of biodiversity around the transport infrastructure and provide more relevant and more adaptive way of managing biodiversity around the infrastructure. I think it's more or less everything we discussed. If I forgot something, I think Charlotte will say me that I lose some point. Maybe to conclude, we rapidly discussed the fact that finally, if we generalize this kind of approach, we can easily imagine that in a couple of years, or no, a decades, maybe 2 decades, probably, we will be able to develop first application able to help in the environmental impact assessment, for example. More or less all digitalized, so you have your digital model supporting the assessment. And this kind of tool will, on the long time, help in managing the global biodiversity issues around the infrastructure. But it will require a lot of work, research, development of a lot of standards, norms, because if every silo previously mentioned, work with its own norms, its own standards, its own definitions of things, it can be very challenging to put everything together. So I expect I won't forget anything.